The calendar read October 3rd, 2015, a Saturday morning in Santa Barbara, California, at a vintage instrument appraisal fair held inside the ballroom of the Cabrillo Arts Center. A woman named Dolores Vega was standing at table 7 with her late husband's guitar in her arms, listening to a young appraiser tell her that what she had driven 90 minutes to bring in was not what she thought it was. The appraiser's name was Bryn. She had a lanyard, a loop, and a voice that carried. She said it the way a person says something they have said many times before, without checking whether this was one of the times it needed gentleness. Your husband's guitar is worth nothing. This isn't a vintage instrument. It's a copy, a student model. You can probably find them on eBay for $40. Dolores held the guitar a little tighter. She did not cry. She was 71 years old, and she had survived things that made a Saturday morning insult manageable. But her chin moved, just slightly, just enough for the man standing 12 feet behind her to notice. He had been standing there for 4 minutes, looking at a mandolin in the case on the neighboring table. He was wearing a mustard yellow linen shirt, a flat black hat pulled low, a turquoise ring on his left hand. He had heard every word. Carlos Santana had driven up the coast that morning on no particular errand. He had a studio in the hills outside Los Angeles and had been there for 3 days recording overdubs. The session had finished the night before, earlier than expected. He had woken at 5, wound his pocket watch, and decided that sitting in a rented house in the hills was not what the day required. He had asked his driver to take the 101 north. No destination. Just the coast road in the morning and whatever the morning offered. They had passed the Cabrillo Arts Center around 9:30. A hand-lettered sign outside, vintage instrument fair, appraisals, dealers, 1 day only. Carlos had said stop. His driver had said, "You're expected in Malibu at 2. Carlos had said, "It's 9:30. Inside, the ballroom held 22 tables. Dealers with cases open, instruments on velvet, small hand-lettered price cards. The smell of the room was cedar and rosin and old case lining, that particular smell that gathers in places where instruments have been kept for years. Overhead lights kept low, natural light coming in from the east windows, landing in bars across the floor. Carlos had walked the perimeter once before stopping at table 6, where a 1940s Neapolitan mandolin sat on a stand with a tag that said not for sale, display only. He had leaned in to look at the scrollwork on the headstock. That was where he was standing when Dolores Vega arrived at table 7. Nobody at the fair had recognized him. He was just an old man in a hat, moving slowly through the tables, touching nothing, looking at everything. That was the only way he knew how to do this. You cannot hear an instrument if you are performing the act of looking at it. You have to go quiet enough that the thing you are looking at can tell you something. He went quiet, and he heard Bryn's voice carrying across the 6 feet of air between the tables. The ballroom of the Cabrillo Arts Center had been built in 1927 and renovated badly in 1984. The renovation had lowered the ceiling and paneled 2 walls in a wood laminate that had been peeling at the seams for 10 years. But the original plaster medallions were still visible at the ceiling corners, and the floor was the original oak, wide-planked and dark with age, and when you stood in the center of the room and spoke at normal volume, your voice found the room, and the room answered back. The dealers were the kind of people who had given 30 years to this. Not wealthy, mostly, not collectors in the investment sense. People who had built a life around knowing things about instruments that required decades of handling to know. The man at table 1 had a wall calendar behind him, with every major instrument auction of the year circled in red. The woman at table 4 was restringing a guitar from 1952 while she talked to a customer, never looking down. The man at table 9 had brought a German lap steel that he said had been played in a touring orchestra in 1938, and he would talk about it all day if you gave him an opening. Bryn was at table 7. She was 29. She had a degree in musicology from UC Davis and had been doing appraisals for 3 years. First at an auction house in San Francisco, now freelance, at fairs like this one. She had the knowledge. She knew what she was looking at the moment it came across the table. The problem was that she had also learned, in those 3 years, to move quickly. A fair like this had 100 people through by noon. You did not have time for the story behind the instrument. You had time for the instrument. Dolores Vega had not known there was a difference. Dolores had driven from Ventura. 90 minutes, her daughter in the passenger seat telling her the whole way that she did not have to do this today, that the guitar was fine where it was, that nobody was making her sell anything. Dolores had said, "I'm not selling it. I just want to know what it is." Her husband, Miguel, had played guitar his whole life. He had learned in Guadalajara as a boy and brought the habit with him when he came to California at 22 and never put it down. He had played at every family event for 43 years, at 2 of their grandchildren's baptisms, at a neighborhood block party every August, at Mass 3 times for special occasions, because Father Ruiz had asked him personally, and he could not say no to Father Ruiz. He had played every morning before work for 40 years, sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee going cold beside him, the guitar in his lap, no sheet music, just whatever his hands remembered. The guitar he played was the one he had brought from Guadalajara. He said his uncle had given it to him. He said his uncle had gotten it from someone in Mexico City, someone who had played it for years before that. He was not precise about the history, because the history, to him, was not the point. The point was the sound. He said it had a voice, not just a sound. He said every guitar had a sound, but this one had a voice. And he was right, because everyone who ever heard him play it said the same thing without being prompted. Miguel had died in February. 8 months ago, Dolores still made 2 cups of coffee every morning and had to remind herself. She had brought the guitar because she wanted to understand what it was, not to sell it. She needed to know if it was something worth passing to their grandson, who was 14 and had started lessons, or if it was a modest instrument that she should let him practice on and then replace with something better when he was ready. She was not asking for money. She was asking for information about something her husband had loved. Bryn had looked at the guitar for 70 seconds. She had turned it over, checked the label inside through the sound hole, tapped the back, sighted down the neck. She had done this without asking where it came from or who had played it. She had set it back on the table and said what she said. A copy. A student model. You can find them for $40. Then she had moved to her notepad to write the assessment. Dolores picked up the guitar and held it against her chest. She was not aware that she was doing it. Her arms just did it. She stood there with it for a moment, not speaking, and then said, quietly, "Thank you," and turned to go. Before we go any further, has anyone ever dismissed something you loved before they understood what it meant? Leave it in the comments. I want to hear from you. Carlos stepped away from the mandolin. He moved to the aisle between table 6 and table 7. He was not hurrying. He was never hurrying. He was just suddenly in a different place than he had been. Close enough that Dolores nearly walked into him before she looked up. She stopped. Her grip on the guitar tightened. "I'm sorry," she said. "No," he held up one hand slightly. "I'm in your way." He looked at the guitar in her arms. "May I?" She looked at him. The hat. The ring. The quiet way he was standing. He did not have the manner of someone who wanted something from her. He had the manner of someone who had already decided to give something and was waiting to be allowed. She held the guitar out. He took it with both hands, the way you take something you have been offered rather than something you have taken. He turned it over. He looked at the back first, spruce, the grain running clean and straight, the wood a pale gold that had deepened over decades. He looked at the binding, the way the purfling had been laid in by hand, the slight unevenness that was not sloppiness, but the particular mark of a craftsman working without a jig. He held the body up toward the east windows and looked at the grain in the light. He ran his thumb gently across the strings. The guitar was out of tune, which was expected. But the sustain on the open G, even untuned, even in a room with a low laminate ceiling, carried for 3 seconds before it released. He pressed his ear to the upper bout and tapped the soundboard with one finger. Not hard, just asking. He handed it back. "Where is your husband from?" he asked. Dolores looked at him. "Guadalajara." Carlos nodded. He looked at the table where Bryn was writing. He looked at Dolores. "Is there somewhere to sit?" he asked. There were chairs along the east wall. They sat. Carlos held the guitar across his knees. He did not introduce himself. He asked about Miguel. He asked how long he had played, where he had learned, what kind of music he favored. Dolores answered without thinking about why she was answering. There was something in the way the question was asked that made it feel like the natural next thing to say. She told him about the kitchen table, about the mornings, about the sound she said had a voice, and she stopped herself and said, "That probably sounds strange." "It doesn't," Carlos said. He looked down at the guitar. He turned the headstock toward the light. He looked at the tuning machines, the way the posts were shaped, the particular style of the nut. There were workshops in Jalisco in the 50s and 60s, he said, where the luthiers were working in a tradition that went back through Spain, and before that through the Arabic instrument makers. They didn't put their names on everything they built. They had no reason to. They were building for local musicians, not for export, not for collectors. The instruments they made are not in catalogs. They don't have provenance documents. They are not worth anything to an auction house. He paused. They are worth a great deal to anyone who can hear them. He ran his thumb across the strings again. Even out of tune, the sound filled the air between them. Dolores watched his face. "May I tune it?" he asked. She nodded. He tuned it by ear, adjusting each peg slowly, listening, adjusting again. It took him 3 minutes. When he was finished, he held it up in playing position, left hand at the 5th fret, and played 3 notes. 1 chord, held. The woman at table 4, 20 feet away, stopped restringing. She did not turn her head. She just stopped. Carlos played a melody. Not long. 30 seconds, maybe 40. A traditional son. One of the ones that had been played at roadhouses in Jalisco in the 50s. The kind of music that Miguel Vega had probably heard as a boy, before he could play it himself. The guitar opened up under his hands the way a very old instrument opens, not all at once, but in layers. Each phrase giving the wood permission to do more, the resonance building inside the body and coming back doubled. When he stopped, the room held it for a moment. The man at table 9 with the lap steel had turned around. Bryn had looked up from her notepad. Carlos handed the guitar back to Dolores. She took it the way you take something you now know you were right to protect. "The label inside is from a workshop outside Tonal," he said. "Your husband's uncle didn't give him a student model. He gave him something a craftsman put real work into." He looked at her. "It won't appear in a price guide. That doesn't tell you what it is. It tells you something about price guides." Dolores pressed her lips together. She looked down at the guitar in her lap. She thought about Miguel at the kitchen table with his coffee going cold. She thought about how she had never once heard him play and thought it was an ordinary sound. "I'm not selling it," she said. "Good," Carlos said. There was a pause. He reached into his shirt pocket and took out the old pick. Edges worn down by decades, no longer sharp at any angle. More a smooth, curved wedge than a standard shape. "Your grandson," he said. She had mentioned him earlier without knowing he was listening. "When he's ready for it, and he'll know when he's ready, this guitar will be the right instrument. Not before. This guitar will ask things of him that a beginner can't answer yet." He placed the pick in her hand. "In the meantime, give him this to practice with. Tell him a friend left it." Dolores looked at the pick. "I don't know your name," she said. "It's all right," Carlos said. He stood and straightened his hat. "The guitar has a voice. You were right about that. Trust what you already knew." He walked back toward the entrance. Flat black hat. Silver bracelets. The old linen shirt, moving like a second skin. He was at the door before anyone spoke. Bryn had come around from behind her table. She was standing in the aisle, watching him leave, with the expression of a person doing arithmetic that is coming out different than it should. She had heard the melody. She had heard the room's response. She had heard something in those 30 seconds that 3 years of appraisals had not put words to yet. which was the difference between the value of an instrument and the value of what an instrument has been through. She picked up the guitar from the velvet where a previous customer had left it. She held it by the neck and looked at it. Then she set it down and went back to Dolores. "Could I look at it again?" she asked. Dolores considered. Then she held the guitar out. Bryn took it. She did this more slowly than she had before. She turned it over. She looked at the purfling, the nut, the way the frets had been seated. She looked through the sound hole at the label for a long time. "I made a fast call," she said. She did not dress it up or explain it. "I was wrong. This is a hand-built instrument. I don't know the exact workshop, but the construction is consistent with Jalisco work from the late 50s or early 60s. She paused. "I can't give you a number because it's not in the reference material I have with me. But it's not nothing." She held it back out. "I'm sorry about your husband." Dolores took the guitar. "Thank you," she said. She walked out into the October morning. Her daughter was at the car, waiting. She looked at the guitar case in her mother's arms. She started to say something. Dolores said, "I know what it is now." They drove back to Ventura. The daughter drove. Dolores sat with the guitar case on her lap, her hands resting on the latches. Her grandson's name was Marco. He was 14 and had been playing for 8 months on a cheap acoustic that buzzed on the 3rd fret. He came over on Sundays. He was careful with everything he touched. Dolores waited. She had heard the man say the guitar would ask things of Marco that a beginner couldn't answer yet, and she believed him, because the man had held the guitar for 5 minutes and spoken about it the way Miguel spoke about it, which was the way you speak about something that has told you its own history. She put it back in the case. She set it in the closet in the room where Miguel had kept his things. She left the pick on top of the case. She started making only 1 cup of coffee. Not because she had stopped grieving, because there are small rituals of transition that are not giving up, but only acknowledging what is. That was October. In the spring, when Marco had been playing for 14 months. When his teacher had given him a piece that required things he had not known fingers could do, he came over on a Sunday, and Dolores said she had something for him. She brought the case out of the closet and set it on the kitchen table. Marco unlatched it. He looked at the guitar. He looked at his grandmother. He reached in and lifted it out with both hands. He sat in the chair where his great-grandfather had sat every morning for 40 years. He settled the guitar across his knee. He played 1 chord. He looked up. "It sounds different," he said. "It has a voice," Dolores said. "Your great-grandfather said so." Marco played it for an hour without stopping. Dolores made coffee and sat with him and did not say anything else, which was exactly the right thing to do. He has played it every Sunday since. He is 17 now. His teacher says there is something in the way he holds the guitar that is hard to teach. Like he is listening to it at the same time as playing it. Like there is a conversation happening between his hands and the instrument. Dolores knows where that comes from. She knows exactly where. There is something else she knows. 3 months after the appraisal fair, her daughter came over with her tablet. She had been looking up instrument fairs, reading about them, trying to understand more about the guitar. She had found something. She showed it to Dolores. There was a photograph. Dolores looked at the screen for a long time. She was looking at a man in a flat black hat and a mustard yellow linen shirt. She looked at the face under the hat. She looked at the hands in the photograph, the left one with the turquoise ring. She went to the closet and got the pick. She held it for a long time without speaking. Then she put it back on top of the case, carefully, where it had been, where it was going to stay. Some gifts are not meant to be explained. They are meant to be passed on. On this channel, we make videos to carry what lives inside Carlos Santana's heart to the next generation. If this story moved you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Let's close with something Carlos Santana once said. The most valuable thing you can give is your full attention. Because when you truly listen, you hear not just the sound, but the soul behind it.